So, welcome to the open house session, the third open house session on balloon volunteering. As usual, there is Sid Shetty with me, but we also have Nikhil, Anurag, and Sanjay. And we will do a shorter than the earlier sessions, perhaps only 25-30 minutes. So let's dive in and get started. So, as many of you know, iSPIRT is um, yeah, I'm having trouble with the slides. iSPIRT is a mission-oriented, non-profit technology think tank. It's a mouthful. So, what makes it mission-oriented? What is our mission? Our mission is really to kind of catalyze India into what we call as its third innings, the product innings. We are very keen that India, in addition to creating these wonderful services companies, hospitals, airlines, IT services companies, and more, telcos, for example, we also want India to produce the equipment, the product part of these industries. We would love to have a Microsoft equivalent here, a Pfizer equivalent here, a Cisco equivalent here, and you get the idea. And so for that to happen, you need a new type of innovation ecosystem. The kind of innovation ecosystem that gives us a TCS or a Narayan Hridayalaya hospital is different from the ecosystem that we need that would give us a Pfizer or a Microsoft. And so iSPIRT is focused on bringing that third type of an ecosystem into play. We don't think this is going to happen overnight. It's going to take us 10, 20, 30 years. So we are here for the long haul. Our understanding is that wherever such a product ecosystem exists, in the US, in Israel, in China now, in Korea, even in Japan, there are always some think tanks, university research labs that are involved, in addition to, of course, the right policies from policymakers, VCs, and market players. So we engage with all of them as we go forward. Now, what makes us different is that we do this as volunteers, as no greed, no glory volunteers. We give the greed to the market players. We want them to be innovating around hard problems of India, creating value and becoming rich. Hopefully, the richest Indians are the innovators of India. And we give away glory to the policymakers because they have a big role to play in fashioning this new type of policies, which India has not had in the last 50, 60, 70 years. So they've got to get rid of the old policies which hold things back, and they have to put in place a new set of policies which India has never had. And it's a hard thing to do. And we feel that they deserve glory for doing that. And by therefore giving away greed and giving away glory, we co-opt both these constituencies into this mission that we are focused on right now. So that's a little bit about Orbit Shift. Now, the good part is that over the last many years that we've been working, we believe we've stumbled into a theory of change, a way of making this happen. And the way of making this happen involves three elements, and they have to be done in a coordinated fashion. And these elements are that you need some public infrastructure. You need equivalent of a GPS for an Uber to come in. And you need the right policies, and then you need the market players. We often give the example of satellite television, where you needed PAMSAT and INSAT as that public infrastructure. Then you needed the policy which allowed private television programs to come. Many of you will not even know that this was not allowed at one time. You may be too young to know that. And but that's called the Prasar Bharati bill. And then all the market players that you see came in that period when the change took place, when that orbit shift took place, whether it's NDTV or it's India Today TV or anything that you think of. They're all market players that came up in a 7-year window. And so these are the three things that have to be brought together. We are doing this for financial services, financial inclusion. We're doing this for health. We are getting more and more engaged with logistics. So we are engaged in this playground building. And since this theory of change works, people are keen to apply it to other areas as well. And we've taken a decision as iSPIRT that we will keep ourselves small and focused, and in many other areas help iSPIRT equivalent organizations to take this forward. So, for example, in animal husbandry, fisheries, aquaculture, you have iSPIRT equivalent that is coming up, and that's going to create something called LiveStack and livestock stack essentially, and that's going to be the public infrastructure. And and iSPIRT is not doing it, but is helping them, making sure that they become quote unquote the iSPIRT of that area, and therefore have the same transformational impact that we are hoping to bring in health and financial inclusion. And so we are helping players like that, and that's part of our program called vSpirit. So our theory of change is is something that we are more comfortable with. It seems to be working as we go forward. So this brings us to this kind of a problem which sets the stage for this conversation. Sometimes what happens is that the digital public infrastructure and policy run ahead of the market, right? And the market has playing up to do, and that's the situation that we are in all of these areas that you see listed here. In account aggregator PHR, which is part of DEPA, you have a situation where the policies are in place. The health one has been announced in August last year. Account aggregator was announced even earlier, and the bill should get passed this year. So that's looking good. If you look at open credit enablement network or open health services network, the APIs are already out there. The public infrastructure from NHA in the case of health is available. In the case of OCEN, it's available from Credol. So that is in place. Digital Sky, both the platform and the policy are there. MAPS, some of you must have followed that MAPS, the liberalization has taken place. And if you want to understand the significance of this, go to our YouTube channel and see a policy hack session with some of the people who architected that policy, and you'll understand why it is so critical and important for the ecosystem. And then finally, WANI, which is Wireless Access Network Interface. All of these will get described a little more later by Siddharth as we go forward. I'm merely introducing them, merely to say that these are places where we have catching up to do. So iSPIRT has a lot of work to do to bring the market ecosystem, up to speed with all of this. And that ends up being done for us by market mavens and market architects. And we know historically that if we don't do this and we don't have this outreach to local players, then the MNCs will come in, because MNCs know how to take advantage of this, right? They understand then when there is public infrastructure, there'll be potentially some value over it. They are not in some angst to figure out whether they should be active or not, right? So you have a Google where you have HTTP that comes and they know they'll build value on that. You have SMTP, they'll build value as Gmail. You have GPS, they'll build value as Maps. You have UPI, they'll build value as Google Pays. So they don't debate whether this is valuable or not. In fact, we know they are keen on all of these things that we are talking about. So what happens is that when that takes place, then the Indian companies, instead of being first movers, become followers. And that's not actually a healthy development. And if you don't have Indian players driving the engine from the front, then the market rules also get muddled. They're not favorable for the local ecosystem. So we know this creates a problem in the future. So that's why in this balloon volunteering session, we are inviting particularly balloon volunteers who would be market architects and market mavens. So there, as many of you know, we have 7 types of volunteers within iSPIRT, and of these, the market architects and market mavens are very important folks in our system. And today, the good thing is that we have actually with us some of them there. And I'm going to start first with Sanjay. Sanjay, you've been part of this process back in time with Aadhaar, but now you're an investor. You're constantly in search of people who will bring this to life. Say a few words, if you don't mind, maybe after a quick introduction, as to why you think this is important for the ecosystem.
Yeah. Thanks, Sharad, and hi everybody. It's great to be here and presenting and having you showing the interest here in iSPIRT and some of the activities we are doing here. I think we are at a very unique. So just by a quick background, my current day job is a venture capitalist. I'm the founding partner of Prime Venture Partners, which is an early stage fund here in India. And you may be familiar with some of our portfolio companies. What we are looking at in our thesis is that India is being transformed through digitization, and it's happening at all fronts, whether it was from identity due to Aadhaar and now the entire way of people, how people are being onboarded into new services and how new services are being delivered. Wherever you had an offline paper-driven system in the past, that's all going through the mobile phone and smartphone and the internet. And couple that with the government infrastructure around Aadhaar, UPI, electronic KYC, signatures, etc. That's creating a very unique moment in time in India. And we think it's a fabulous opportunity. And several of these success stories are already playing out. But we are until now just scratching the tip of the iceberg, and a lot more is going to come over the next 3 to 5 years, and that's why it's such an exciting time for all of us here in India, right? And not just for all of us in India. Sharad mentioned people from all over the world, companies and businesses from all over the world are realizing that this is a great place to be right now and are coming in quite seriously and investing. And what we want to do is also help facilitate the local ecosystem. So that's a very quick background on what I do. I historically I was one of perhaps the first mobile payments entrepreneur in India as the founding CEO of MCheck from 2006 to 2010. And after that, worked on the Aadhaar program for about 18 to 24 months, where I got to interact closely with several of the team at iSPIRT. Sharad mentioned names like Pramod Verma, Vivek Raghavan, and so on, and of course Sharad himself, and have had a great opportunity living through the pre-launch of UPI that I'm sure Nikhil will later talk about later. I'll talk about how Aadhaar scaled up itself and several of these applications that we are talking about, right? So I think it's a very amazing opportunity to for all of us, and at the same time it's also our opportunity, and we need to all sort of roll up our sleeves and help define and shape how this opportunity is going to play out. Because one thing is clear is that what's going to happen in India has not happened anywhere else in the world. The West got access to the internet after having created its own economic wealth. In China's case, it probably happened concurrently. In India's case, I think the internet and digitization opportunity will actually end up being perhaps the single biggest platform on which we achieve the goals of economic progress and inclusion and inclusive growth across the board. And it's for all of us to actually define and shape that opportunity, right? The government is providing us a great platform, but really I think the combination of how the private sector, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, as well as the government work together in unison will create this massive opportunity for GDP enhancement in India, for transforming the lives of billions of people. And one of the reasons that's really got me excited and why I encourage people to spend time here is, as Sharad mentioned, one of the areas that we need to focus on a lot is also in the policy making and the market making. Because sure, we can define and build all these amazing digital platforms, which is being done, and you'll hear a lot more of. But coupled with that, you need to have the right marketing strategy, the right branding strategy, the right go-to-market approach, as well as more importantly, a long-term sustainable business model, right? And given that these are new developments, there is really no precedent elsewhere in the world, and we cannot just copy and paste or borrow from what has worked elsewhere. And that's where I think the opportunity to shape the lives and livelihoods of several companies, several millions of consumers, will far outstrip what you could hope to achieve if you were, say, an entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs, would end up serving a few tens of millions of users at best. Here, everything you touch is going to impact 200-300 million people, if not a billion people. The problems here are really exciting. The impact that one can have here will be really spectacular. And I think this is the crash course MBA that anybody in their youth can hope to have, but will also be both satisfying and history making. So that's sort of a quick thought on my side on why, working through with iSPIRT and supporting the activities here can be meaningful and impactful, and also, self-enhancing.
Thanks. Thank you, Sanjay. Appreciate that. And what you mentioned is so true, because I think we have in Nikhil and Anurag folks who are both founders, but they've also been playground builders. And Nikhil, you've been a playground builder, an extraordinary playground builder, and one of the 3 volunteers ever in iSPIRT to be called as a volunteer hero. Now, we all know the reason for that was that had you not been there, we wouldn't have had the ecosystem build out for UPI take place in the way that it did. But tell us a little bit, since you've kind of lived both these roles of a founder and a playground builder, do you really buy what Sanjay is saying, that playground building is life changing, not because it creates outcomes, but it sets you up for the future? As he said, maybe it's like an MBA. Any thoughts that you have on that, Nikhil? And I'm going to go away from the slides so that everybody can see the faces more clearly, and we'll come back to the slides in a minute.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sharad. I, uh, if I just reflect back on my own life and my journey, I think the 2 years that I spent at iSPIRT has been life changing for me. When I started as a volunteer, um, my goal was to contribute my time towards something that I can do towards nation building. And little did I know that I'll get an opportunity to work on things like GST and UPI and Vani, which are like 3 big projects. I was in some sense at the right place at the right time. Now, when I reflect back, I think the kind of learning that I've had, I don't think even an MBA will probably justify the kind of experiences, the kind of people that I got to meet, the kind of entrepreneurs that I got to meet, the kind of events that I could participate in, and so on. Um, and this journey has been very special for me, especially as a person, because like they say, it's where you are an average of the person that you kind of hang around with. Having the opportunity to work with a lot of senior folks like you, like Pramod, Sanjay Jain, Sanjay Swami, most importantly Nandan Nilekani, and bunch of others. I had this unique privilege of being able to learn from all of you, and I think it was just not years of learning, but decades of learning. And I am a much wiser person today. And I, like I said, the kind of social capital that I was able to build when I played this role at iSPIRT. When I was working, it was for no greed, no glory. It was all in the service of the nation, wanting to make UPI successful. I happened to get to touch a lot of people's lives, work with various different founders, product managers, VCs, policymakers, and so on. And today, I don't think if I'd gone to a business school, I would have probably gotten all of these rich experiences, which is completely probably outside of campus. Working with so many different people. Today, I am a much wiser person. My ability to think long term, think platforms, thinking about co-creation. These have become a way of life for me. Whenever I look at hard problems, automatically, I kind of switch on to this mode about how do we co-create solutions? How do we get people together into this mission? How do we align everybody? So for me, it's kind of become a way of life. I would say, it was just not a degree, but it's the way I think, it's the way I coach people, the way I recruit as a founder today. All of these have become, in some sense, my guiding principles. Um, and uh, and and honestly, I would love to do this journey again and again. I keep sharing this, that if I get a chance to step out as of my founder shoes and come to become an ecosystem builder again, I would love to do that. But if you look at the kind of company that I'm also trying to build now, is actually based on the same principles, that we want to be a company that enables people to build on top of us. So it's been a phenomenal journey for me, and like I said, I actually had a goal that I wanted to go to Stanford and do my MBA. And just for the people who are watching, I instead got a chance to go to Stanford and do a panel with world-class companies like Google and Uber, and WhatsApp being on the same stage. So life kind of turned 360-degree for me, and I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity.
So, so this notion that we have that ultimately the $10 billion, $100 billion companies, and now $1 trillion companies, they are the ones who go from building a product to actually building a franchise, right? And so if you want to build a franchise, you need to learn how to build an ecosystem around your product, right, where everybody is making money. In some sense, you learn that in the iSPIRT context, because it requires many new things to be done, because it's really going beyond building a single kind of a product, which has a product market fit. It requires a different kind of thinking altogether. So I really feel, in some sense, what we are doing in iSPIRT will over time lead to these individual companies that will be able to transition from making a product, a successful product, to actually building a franchise, right? And without that, you can't get to even 10 billion, frankly, let alone hundreds of billions. And you can see that happen for almost every company that we've talked about. And this is a difficult transition. Look at salesforce.com. It was a product company, then it became a franchise, right? And the value that gets created when you become a franchise is completely different. So Anurag, you probably were thinking of all of this when you said, hey, in addition to being a market player, I'll also do some playground building, right? And I'll pick up a tough area, as you have been looking at, for figuring out the business model for PHR. So share with us your thoughts. How has it been? It must be tough to manage both of these simultaneously. What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. Thanks, Sarath, for, first of all, I would like to say that, being a part of iSPIRT in terms of figuring out problems, figuring out the solutions to problems that have a longer term impact, that, will have an impact in decades and years to come. That is a fulfilling thing to do. Like, there's nothing that compares to that. So, while being a founder has its own different things that you care about in terms of building something that people will use, here we are looking to create a platform that will work for decades to come, and that in itself has a great self-satisfaction that it brings. Now, in terms of the PHR ecosystem, the problem that we are trying to solve is unique in its own standpoint. Like, we are trying to figure out that how do we create an economic incentive model for the entire PHR ecosystem to actually come to life. Like, we have decided and we have told that, okay, these are the different players that exist in the ecosystem, and this is the data that is being created. But the data currently is resting in silos, and in a lot of places the data is not even being created correctly. So we need to figure out all the parts of the ecosystem that will actually create this data and will enable the transfer of this data in a way that it benefits the entire Indian society in terms of continuity of care, and moving India from what we have today, like a reactive healthcare ecosystem, to more preventive healthcare ecosystem. So that's the goal that we are trying to solve as a part of the figuring out the economic incentive model. And I'll break down, Sarad, your question into a few other parts. It's such a challenging problem to solve. 1.1, 1.2 billion population, 4.1 healthcare visits that people go to on a yearly basis. Imagine if all that data is aggregated into one place and everyone has some way to access this data and use this data to create, move India from a the healthcare ecosystem that we have today to a more data-driven healthcare, the impact that it will have is humongous. It's just huge. It's something that cannot be compared, to any ecosystem that's existed. And the problems that it throws is also very different from the problems that countries like US will see, wherein there is things like insurance penetration, there's easier access to funding and things like that. India in itself shows a different set of challenges, and solving those challenges not only gives us a benefit in terms of solving this for India, it kind of creates a roadmap for maybe a few other countries to adopt the ecosystem and maybe take forward, and thus helping our ecosystem to globalize. And we have seen that happening in UPI, and I'm sure and I believe that this will also happen as we create the PHR ecosystem. Also, just to add a few more things as to why this also becomes very interesting is because the challenges that it throws is very different, as I mentioned. So, for example, when we are talking of data resting in silos and data being created in the right way, suddenly when we talk about data flowing from one ecosystem player to another player, flowing from, say, a hospital to an insurance player, the concerns that come around user privacy, about the the data transfer, these are new problems, and these need to be solved in its own ways. At the same time, how do you incentivize each ecosystem player to actually function in the ecosystem? When we visualize the ecosystem as an overall set of multiple players, it's easy to say that at some point the ecosystem will function. But how do you enable that in the short term? How do you enable that ecosystem to function in the long term? And how do you create a mechanism? How do you create that economic model so that each player of that ecosystem is incentivized to come and participate in the ecosystem by their own? That in itself is a huge challenge that, while solving for this, we try to take care of. And whenever someone else tries to further improve the basic hypothesis, the basic framework we have laid out, it will bring life to that as well.
Very nice. So I have one more question for Nikhil before we move on to Sid here. Nikhil, we are in a peculiar stage of our ecosystem where the multinationals are quicker to seize opportunities in the Bharat market than our local players are, largely because they're not used to this kind of architecture, and things are actually getting better. I mean, today they're far better than what they were in 2016, and I'm quite sure that give us a few years, all this is going to completely change. Now, share your thoughts about some of the challenges you faced, because back, if you remember in February 2016, when that sandbox of UPI came out, and subsequently April and then August launch, it was a struggle to motivate, our startups to get involved in that. Share some of those struggles and how they presented a challenge, a unique challenge of its own, and overcoming that repeatedly is going to be an integral part of bringing to life a new kind of a pattern in our startup ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful to kind of like look at how we've been building products in India. So one of our paradigms has been, especially the way the market has been kind of architected. India was always like, there is something that's happened in the US. So are you like the X of India? Are you the Y of, India? And so on and so forth. And this was in some sense like our mental model when we thought about businesses that were built in India, especially for entrepreneurs. We would like to associate ourselves with something that's happening in the US, so that it acts as a reference point to the investors that we would talk to and so on, and say, hey, look, we are like that, but we are for this for a different market, and so on and so forth. So when we started UPI, one of the hardest thing was to imagine who are you, what are you for, because there was no UPI for any other country. This was the first time something like this was even being spoken about anywhere in the world. And then let alone imagining something to be built on top of this was kind of outside our imagination, right? So a lot of that hard work was essentially kind of getting people to understand how things could change. I think like when we grow up, a lot of us grow with this mentality or the challenges that we have seen during our time, that we don't really trust in the things that government builds, or if there is anything to do with large institutions. You almost don't have any trust in these systems. So for me, one of the first big challenge was essentially to kind of to get innovators to kind of buy into this vision, because typically these are opposite polar ones, right? So on one side, yeah, you as an entrepreneur, you're like extremely pissed about all things around what's happening around you, and that's where you want to start something and change the world. And the last thing you want to trust is in the government and bureaucracy. So whenever something that gets started with the government, there's always a question like, ye chalega ki nahi chalega? Look at my goddamn roads. What are you talking about digital roads that somebody is going to build?
I remember eKYC when we were pushing, we would go to all these telcos, and Airtel folks would say, you know what, how can we rely on our eKYC on a government system? Chalega ke nahi chalega? At least it's expensive today, paper KYC, but it works. It's in our hands. Right? And until Jio came and did 160 million eKYCs in 160 days, right? It didn't change that psychology at all. And luckily, things are not perfect, but they are certainly places where you can build mission critical.
This was the first problem for the, largely the startup ecosystem, which consists of venture capitalists and mostly entrepreneurs. Uh, the second big challenge was to get entrepreneurs to think what are the first order, second order effects of this platform going to be like? Because, in India, our startup ecosystem itself is fairly new in the sense the product ecosystem, unlike the US, we have, 10, 20, 15 years of building products, and we have such a longer way to go. And it is not so normal for us to actually, we like platforms like UPI have not been coming across that, our mental models are designed to think about what impact it would have. So the second hardest problem was to convince and actually work with the entrepreneurs, ideating what product experiences can be built, how will life of people like you and me or someone on the street would change. This required a high amount of conviction, optimism, because you typically, as an entrepreneur, you're also, while you're very optimistic, you're also looking at the downsides of, what if it doesn't work, and so on and so forth. A lot of the challenge was, in some sense, rallying, founders to who already had a business or things that they were doing, to say, hey, look, things are going to change. And that was the hardest thing for somebody to believe. We are, without naming names, we have spent so much time with people who are already in the business to convince them to say, hey, life is going to change. And people would just not believe it, because they were so entrenched in their current way of thinking, building. It also posed a risk to their current business model. So we often found it easier to work with people who had no baggage, and say, hey, look, I was just talking about this to Sanjay. Bharat Pay, which is one of the largest fintech startups today built on UPI, was a bunch of students who participated in the UPI hackathon, and they were doing some things around, and they had no legacy, so they were like, we're going to go all into this, right? So it was like do or die for them. Uh, so the second big challenge was, how do we get entrepreneurs to think beyond what is happening in the present, and kind of get them to think 2, 3, 4, 5 years on how things are going to change and build for that, right? So that was the second biggest problem. And the third biggest problem, obviously, was to handle these entrepreneurs to bring this to life. So while ideas are good, it was good. So like going from that sandbox, after demonetization, getting Beam built, getting the ecosystem energized, ensuring the UPI uptimes are up in place. All of these small things were important for companies like a PhonePe or a Razorpay or a JustPay or a BharatPay to take off, because if these small things didn't happen, obviously they wouldn't have seen the kind of traction that they saw today. So these were the three large challenges, and walking, this path with founders and helping them was phenomenal. And obviously there was a lot at stake. If this hadn't happened, obviously we would have had eggs on our face, but luckily things fell into place. And, it was all of these people of community of folks who were vested in from day one, wanting to make this happen, is what is the success of UPI today. I don't think it is just one person. It was all of this collective energy of everybody saying, look, we need to make this happen, is what has gotten us here.
Absolutely. So with that, I'm going to pull in.
Just one small thing to add to that,
Yes,
right?
huh.
I think what got people very excited also was that the sheer audacity of what was being attempted. Right? It was not a incrementally different or an incrementally better solution. It was just so audacious that those who did jump in, looked at it and said this can be, 10x or 100x better than the state of the art. And I think that is now with the UPI having proven that it can happen, all of the newer initiatives, I think people are starting to believe that such audacious goals can actually be achieved. They're not just pipe dreams; they're actually likely to become reality.
Exactly.
So it's a lot easier for the newer initiatives.
Yeah. And that gives me the right segue for Sid here, because my question to you, Sid, as you bring all these areas to life, why don't you start with the one that you think is actually the most audacious?
That's a tough one, Sharad, but I think empowerment and protection architecture at this point in time is definitely the most audacious effort, both within India as well as globally, where our mission is essentially to give every individual and business control over their data. And that manifests through techno-legal frameworks that are now rolling out in the financial health sector and beyond. I think is audacious because when we started this journey 4 years back, it started off in an extremely small step. We're just putting out an electronic standard, right? That's it. The first step was putting out an electronic standard, not even a set of APIs, but a simple standard that said, here's how you can describe consent in an electronic digital manner. And then on that edifice, to build out the APIs, to get adoption, like Nikhil mentioned, for folks that were evangelizing data, often go into a room, everyone would be like, dude, why the hell would anyone want to share data as part of the system, right? And so it was the most contrarian opinion in that room. And but as things stand, you've got the largest banks that are now early adopters of the system. In fact, fintechs, Bangalore-based fintechs, are actually laggards, and that's unfortunate. And you're seeing even the largest hospitals come on board through the National Health Authority. So I would definitely say DEPA's vision, and to see that now picking up globally. For a long time, GDPR was considered the gold standard. And so people, while we were building DEPA, would say, GDPR exists, why do you need DEPA? Now countries are actually looking at it as GDPR 2.0. In fact, in the EU itself, there's active conversation of scrapping GDPR. And these are from policymakers. These are not entrepreneurs, but these are policymakers. You guys can even Google it online. You'll see articles now coming up that talk about GDPR being scrapped and a revised version being built. Right. And I think that brings out the importance of just thinking through some of these from a very first principle standpoint, and then just being anchored to that and slogging it out so that over a period of time, it goes on to manifest both within one's country and then beyond. So I would say definitely DEPA. And in that context, I think both the account aggregator, the personal health records, and telecom are key. For context, account aggregator essentially gives you control of your financial data. And this is rolling out, you may have heard of, for the folks on the call, Sahamati, which is an alliance of market players that have come together to do this, along with, of course, various regulated entities that have been backing this for a while. The personal health records allow you to get access to your health information. It could be for use cases like remote second opinion, electronic filing and auto adjudication of claims, getting new types of personalized insurance policies going forward, or a range of, even as simple as in the long term, getting an AI to assist a doctor in a diagnosis decision, especially since a lot of information about the body is being democratized through biomarkers and its testing. And so you can now build models on top of that. And PHR is being anchored today within the National Health Authority. And then you have telecom, where the largest telcos, along with TRAI, are looking at how do we give people control of the telecom data, again, for financial inclusion purposes, but also for telcos to build better cross-sell, upsell, and related components. In the case of account aggregator, PHR, and telecom, what's most important is the business model. The business model of the consent manager. It's clearly a very strategic role to play because you're now collecting consent, and every data flow, not just in India, but globally, is moving towards a direction of being consented to. The second element of it is what are the business models for the gateway? The gateway is a network that orchestrates this ecosystem and brings it to life. And then, of course, there are new players come in, prediction service providers, data governance products, and beyond. And so, therefore, for folks coming in that are interested in thinking through what will be the new economics of this model, and it affects, it's not about looking at it in the context of DAPA as well, but DAPA is really an enabler to an entirely new cash flow lending ecosystem. It's an enabler to a new advertising ecosystem, as you're seeing in the US, where a lot of cookie-based tracking is now going away. So thinking through those second and third order implications is also key. And if someone's interested in that underlying economic framework, that would be very important, and please do reach out. Oken and Ocean. Oken is an open credit enablement network. To put it simply, think of it just like UPI is an open API for payments. DAPA is an open API for data. Oken is an open API for cash flow credit. And so today, the largest lenders in India have plugged into Oken. And you can watch the iSPIRT Oken open house discussions. I think there are multiple on the technology and market architecture that have been put out. And what we're really looking for in Oken is not just for someone to help us think through, again, the business model aspects, but also evangelizing this with the market. Because this now needs to cascade across lenders, not just the top lenders, but the long tail of lenders in India, and needs to cascade across what are called loan service providers. These are the front-end apps, the borrower's agents that facilitate this entire process and bring it together. And so what are the incentives for them to participate? What are the incentives for them to really be the borrower's agents and not become rogue intermediaries, like is in the case of, say, mutual fund brokers, are all key aspects to think about. But also evangelizing this and bringing it to life, much like what Nikhil did with UPI, is a key role that we're looking to fill in the open ecosystem. The same extends to Ocean. Ocean is nascent, but it's a similar version of Oken for telehealth services. And so we are looking for volunteers to step up to evangelize Ocean and then also think through the business model implications of it. Coming to Digital Sky and Maps. Digital Sky was essentially our attempt to integrate drones into civilian airspace. The Digital Sky policy is out, the technology is out. It's obviously going through its own set of teething troubles because India's taken a frontier position in this rather than waiting for global regulations and standards to fall in place. But while that evens out, I think it's extremely important for us to start thinking through, again, what are the business model implications, both. And what's interesting about Digital Sky is it's not just a software component, like is in the case with the areas I described previously, but there is also a hardware and manufacturing component to it, because you're dealing with drones, you're dealing with drone ports. These are all new technologies that are hardware that need to come to life. And as anyone knows, building a hardware company in India is non-trivial, but you now have the playground to do so. Same is the case with maps. The recent map liberalization essentially makes it completely free, no bureaucracy for anyone to go out and map India and build high precision maps. But I think purely from passing a policy decision, innovation is not going to be catalyzed. And so you do need now a lot of evangelization, working with the incumbents, but also finding new challengers that are going to put together, one, the right set of mapping technologies, LiDAR and Street View and drones, and bring that side of the ecosystem together, but also bring the consumption side. Who will buy these high precision maps? Why should they buy it? How would it change urban planning? How would it change how people experience historical sites? How would it change how people plan their projects, large infrastructure projects? And so therefore thinking both sides of it, the supply side of it and the technology that needs to come together, but also the demand side of it, who would pay for this in a market, scarce market like India, becomes key. And finally, Vani. Vani is an interoperable Wi-Fi hotspot system. Think of it as if you're running a kirana shop, you will be able to get Wi-Fi in a box and resell it with no bureaucracy, no additional licensing, none of that. And if you're a consumer on any one of, and you may be using any one of the consumer apps, you will be able to seamlessly across India access any public Wi-Fi hotspot in an interoperable manner. Just like you go to the store, buy a 5 rupee chai, when you pay the guy 10 rupees, the remaining 5 rupees can be spent buying a sachet of Wi-Fi. Now, this ecosystem recently got announced by the cabinet. It has in fact been launched by the Department of Telecom. There are about, I think, 30,000 Wi-Fi hotspots already enabled. That's still small, given the 5 million target that the government's looking at. But within WANI, what's very important, again, is the business model. I think evangelization is key, but what we're really looking for are contributors to help us think through, again, what will be the business model for these companies to come together, package it, offer Wi-Fi in a box, be consumer app players, and then, of course, evangelize this with the next set of wave 2 players in the market. So these are a range of challenges that are out there. And if any of them are interest to you, then please do reach out, both as a market maven or as a market architect. When you reach out, Pratibha from iSPIRT will speak to you and share with you various details about iSPIRT. You should also give the iSPIRT Volunteers Handbook a read, especially the section on becoming a balloon volunteer, which is the initial volunteering journey or volunteering path at iSPIRT. It's known as balloon volunteering. And if you're interested in understanding more about how iSPIRT operates, how we interact with market participants, what is that model? I'd strongly urge you to read the Playgrounds Coda. It's extremely important, and we will address a lot of those questions that will come up prior to your conversation with Pratibha. And then Pratibha will talk to you and then connect you with the right volunteer at iSPIRT who will anchor you through this balloon volunteering journey and take it forward. So that's about it